Well, greetings all, and welcome to part 3 of this module on motivation, attributions, and implicit beliefs about ability. So the specific learning outcomes associated with this lecture are that you would provide a recommendation to promote the adoption of adaptive attributions, as well as to encourage incremental views of ability. So at this point, we have primarily discussed factors that tend to precede motivated behavior. For example, unfulfilled psychological needs we may be driven to address, such as competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Today we'll cover attributions and the beliefs that influence them. So attributions refer to the explanations we provide to explain why a particular event occurred. And we do this all the time. I mean, what's the reason that driver honked at me? I mean, did he think he recognized me and was saying hello? Or was he expressing, shall we say, frustration? And that girl at the lawn yesterday, was that look she gave me because she thought I was amusing or perhaps just weird? And of course, this happens in classrooms too. Take a moment to think back to a test or other assignment in which you received a favorable grade. So what's the reason, the explanation? Was it because you studied particularly hard for that test? Was it because it was an easy test? Perhaps you just really liked the subject and were interested in it. An enthusiastic teacher? Maybe just luck? So now think back to a test or assignment in which you received an unfavorable grade. So what was the reason for that? I mean, was it because you didn't study? Maybe you overslept? Perhaps it was just some form of bad teaching, unclear expectations, or perhaps a poorly written or designed test. Or maybe you're just not good at that particular subject. Was there a lot going on in your life at that time? Or perhaps just bad luck? These are all causal attributions as well, explanations for why a particular event occurred. And they are important. I mean, the attributions we make factor into our motivation and future behavior. So to better understand how this works, it's useful to think of attributions as possessing 3 dimensions: locus, stability, and controllability. So locus refers to the location of the cause. Does the explanation for my score rest within me or outside of me? So let's look at some of the common attributions we just noted. So studying hard. Well, that rests within you, yeah? I mean, it's not your roommate studying that impacted your score. Have an interest in the material? That would be internal. Sleeping in late? Well, that also rests within you. Unless, the electricity went out causing your alarm to reset, in which case that would be external. Good, bad teaching? External locus. Difficult subject? External. Not good at a particular subject? Well, that would be internal. And you see the difference? How about luck? Well, unless luck is a personal characteristic, it's external. And if it is a personal characteristic, I might actually keep that to yourself unless you're, up to handling a barrage of invites to hit Vegas. So the second dimension refers to stability. So is the cause stable and unchanging across time, or unstable and unpredictable or changing across time? So again, let's look at a few of those attributions. So studying hard. Well, that implies something unstable, doesn't it? I mean, that you applied yourself for this test, but not necessarily every test. An interest, on the other hand, is generally a bit more stable. I mean, the things that we have an interest in today, we were probably interested in yesterday and probably will be interested in tomorrow. Sleeping in late, unstable. Though I think of this as a relatively stable with a particular friend of mine from my undergrad days. But never mind. Good, bad teaching, generally stable. I mean, a good or bad teacher today is probably a good or bad teacher tomorrow. Not good at a particular subject? Well, most of us think of this as a stable characteristic, though we'll actually challenge that notion in a bit again, so we'll stick it in the middle for now. And luck? Well, that's almost by definition something that's unstable, yeah? The third dimension refers to controllability. So do I have control over this outcome, or does someone else? So again, studying hard? Well, generally something the student has control over. Interest? Well, that's probably more debatable, but an argument could be made that it's uncontrollable, though we'll explore this topic actually in greater detail in the next lecture. Sleeping in late? Generally considered controllable. Good, bad teaching? So unless you took part in the actual training of your teacher, this is uncontrollable. Not good at a particular subject? Well, many believe it's uncontrollable, but again, we'll problematize that notion here before we conclude. And luck, uncontrollable. So you may have picked up that many of these attributions depend on how they're framed in determining exactly where they fall. And if you've done so, then you're absolutely correct. Attributions are shaped by our perceptions and beliefs, not necessarily the true state of things. But how they are framed is more important than actuality, because how they are framed determines the impact on future behavior. So here's how it works. So imagine you have a student, Jimmy, who did poorly on one of your assignments, one in which most other students actually did just fine. So perhaps the issue in reality was poor preparation, an internal and controllable factor. However, the attribution the student makes is to a poor test, a factor external and uncontrollable. So how will your student prepare for the next assignment? Or perhaps a better question is, why would he take a different approach and put time into studying when he believes it won't affect the outcome? Now imagine you have another student, John, who performed just as poorly as Jimmy, and for similar reasons, poor preparation. However, unlike Jimmy, who may have made an attribution error, John correctly attributes his performance to poor preparation, something internal and within his control. So how is he likely to approach the next assignment? Well, seeing the outcome of this test as something that is at least partly under his control, he's likely to be more motivated to prepare, likely viewing the situation as a learning opportunity and one in which to explore employing different study strategies. So a couple of words about attributions. One is that we expect similar outcomes when we make attributions to stable factors. And that makes sense, yeah? I mean, if I believe my grade was the result of something stable, such as poor teaching or inability, then why would I expect there to be a different outcome in the future? It's also worth noting, and perhaps you've made the induction, that students who make attributions to internal controllable factors are more likely to have success than students who fail to take responsibility for their behavior. In other words, those that make external uncontrollable attributions. So let's return to ability, that factor we kept putting in the middle between stable, unstable, and controllable, uncontrollable. So, and as we've noted, this is because many people view ability as something that is stable and uncontrollable. You either have it or you don't. So perhaps you've heard others, or you may have even said this yourself, I can't do math, or I'm no good at writing. But you may recall that we've actually covered one type of ability in the past, intellectual ability or, intelligence. And you may recall at that time that's fairly obvious that intellectual ability does indeed change over the course of one's life. I mean, you are more intelligent today than you were when you were, 2. But intelligence is something that many people believe doesn't change. You either have it or you don't. So clearly, beliefs about ability can differ, and as I'm sure you're beginning to pick up on, these different implicit beliefs result in different behaviors. Some adaptive, some not so much. So Carol Dweck has described two categories of implicit beliefs about ability: entity views and incremental views. So quite simply, an entity view of ability refers to a belief that ability is fixed and stable. So she refers to this as a fixed mindset. So students with this mindset are motivated to look good by getting good grades, even if they have to take shortcuts to get them, or to avoid looking bad. So the attribution here is that ability is internal, stable, and most pertinent, uncontrollable. So an incremental view, on the other hand, refers to a belief in ability as something that can be improved, if but gradually. So Carol Dweck refers to this as a growth mindset. So students with a growth mindset are more likely to see their skills as something that can be improved through hard work. They may seek challenges and persevere when the going gets tough. So like a fixed mindset, the attribution is that ability is internal. However, unlike the fixed mindset, those with a growth mindset see ability as something that is unstable and controllable. So, what do we do with all this information? Well, I'd like to offer 3 broad recommendations. First, we know that students who make attributions to internal and controllable factors are more likely to be engaged, motivated, and achieve success. Therefore, students should be encouraged to see their own role in their successes and failures. And yes, it may be true that there were factors outside of the student's control that resulted in an unfavorable result, but it is likely that the student made a variety of choices leading up to that event that also contributed to the outcome. So, what preparation strategies did she or he employ? Were video games chosen over study time? Blame or explanations centered on sources outside of the student's control do not offer an opportunity to learn from the experience or to envision how choice can result in different outcomes. And this sets the stage for repeat performances. Likewise, noting the student's role in her or his success highlights adaptive learning strategies and self-regulation strategies that may otherwise escape attention. So pointing these out better assures their adoption in the future. An additional benefit of encouraging ownership of behavior is that it promotes student autonomy. So this is also associated with increased motivation. Second, students should be shown that ability can be developed. So teachers and parents often inadvertently encourage entity views of ability with the feedback they provide. So praising students for being intelligent or for their intelligence, such as being smart, promotes the belief that intelligence is a stable, fixed trait, which weds it to one's identity and makes it personal. So the adoption of this fixed trait belief leads to behaviors intended to maintain this social perception. Thus, students will be more likely to choose easy tasks rather than those they can learn and develop from, opt out when the challenge presents itself, and take shortcuts such as superficial learning strategies and cheating. On the other hand, praising students for the effort they apply towards learning shifts the focus from how one is being perceived by others to factors subject to change and under one's control, such as, the amount of effort applied to the task. This results in students who are more engaged in future attempts. Finally, teachers should model adaptive attribution, specifically a growth mindset, which we now know is internal, unstable, and controllable. So Dweck notes teachers with a fixed mindset merely ask, can I teach these students? While those with a growth mindset ask the question, how can I teach them? So this distinction is really important. Can I implies a dichotomy. Either one can or cannot. Whereas how can I suggest that students can be taught? It's just a matter of the adoption of effective strategies, perseverance, and patience. So the latter question implies growth in the belief that all students fall into the category of teachable under the right circumstances. Modeling a growth mindset and viewing student learning as unstable and controllable also sends the message to students that their fate is not fixed but subject to their own agency. Modeling adaptive attributions also means being aware of one's own biases, our tendency to shirk responsibility for failure. So this entails reflection and responding to classroom management issues by asking, what could I be doing different? So doing so results in increased problem-solving skills, greater satisfaction, and reduced burnout. So it also results in an increase in student learning and a more positive climate where students seek to learn rather than to blame. So this concludes the third lecture in this unit. So there's a short self-assessment in the lectures folder, and I will see you in class.